Thank you very much, Ellen Sensei. My name is Jon Turner. I'm part of the Everyday Buddhist team, and I also am a minister at the Orange County Buddhist Church and the Vista Buddhist Temple. And it's an honor to be asked again to do a live event. This time, I'm going to focus on how Buddhism can really appeal to our imagination. And this is something that I've experienced recently. I've kind of discovered this through personal practice. There's two main branches of Buddhism. One is monastic, which most people know about, but there's another one called householder Buddhism. And this is where Pure Land Buddhism lives. It's made for everyday people who can't leave their house, can't go off to a monastery and practice in isolation. They don't have the time to do heavy lifting. And one of the things I think the Buddha did quite well is he accepts his students where they're at. And so, if you're a single male monastic, there's a certain path you follow. There's a lot of discipline, a lot of rigor. I have a feeling you try to remove bad habits and get in control of your habit making, your habitual behavior. You try to calm your emotions and kind of detach. And also get control of your imagination. Stay focused. Don't go on flights of fancy. But those things are really hard to get rid of. And you'd really have to be a monastic with discipline and long periods of practice to be able to achieve that. And I think what the Buddha did for householders is that's just not practical. It's effective for monastics, but it's not practical for householders. So today, we're going to focus on how Buddhism just appeals to our natural sense of imagination. Our mind wanders. We don't stay focused. We have flights of fancy. And I think the Buddha uses those to reach us spiritually. So a lot of the characteristics we have are taken advantage of, not removed. And so today's appealing to our imagination. I wanted to show you this. This was another live event I did on March 14th, 2025. It's up on our YouTube channel. It was about habits and how we can create new habits. We're very good habit-making machines. So learning how to chant, learning how to breathe, learning how to bow, learning how to listen. These are all habits that we can develop as easily as we develop bad habits. We can develop good habits. And this is called neuroplasticity. And this is something that is one of the major mechanisms for making progress along the path in one's everyday life is you start to form habits with intentionality. You focus on new habits, healthy habits, habits that help you grow and move in the world with more grace. And then that same year, October 3rd, 2025, I did another live event called Buddha's Everywhere, Part 1. And this had to do with having Buddhism appeal to us emotionally, to touch our hearts, to be open and affected by statuary, art, sound, mandalas. And so that's what this was about, to appeal to our emotions, to become visually overwhelmed, to connect with works of art in a very personal way. And so the name of that was Buddha's Everywhere. I was going to a temple called Senshin. I went to UCLA in college. The only thing bad about Senshin Temple is it's right next to USC, but other than that, it's quite nice. These are the statues I have in one of the bookcases in my house. And I took this picture with my iPhone, and it was going to be the opening slide to my talk on Buddha's Everywhere in person at this temple. And we have Kuan Yin, we have Buddhas from different regions, geographical locations. That one on the second from the left is my favorite, from China. It has a turquoise patina. It's solid iron. So this is what I was going to open with. But before service, I had to go to the restroom. I wanted to make sure I wasn't going to be interrupted during my Dharma talk. So I go into the restroom at the temple and I go to wash my hands, and this is what I found at their temple. So Buddhas really were everywhere. So I took a picture of this real quick before my Dharma talk, and I replaced my opening slide with this from Senshin Temple. So it's really quite amazing. You have a Kuan Yin on the left, or Kanon, and then we have I can't tell for sure, but it looks like a cat Buddha or a frog Buddha. We have a dog Buddha, an elephant, and two elephant Buddhas. And so I thought this was wonderful. These statues mean a lot. And, if you're a dog lover or a cat lover, it can really have an emotional appeal to you. So without heavy lifting, we showed how we rely on our habits, our emotions, and now we're going to look at how we rely on our imagination. And these are the two books I'm referencing a lot. The one on the left is called The Promise of a Sacred World by Nagapriya. This one has a lot to do with Shinran Shonin, our founder of Jodo Shinshu, and he interprets his writings as an emotional, spiritual confessional, not doctrine, not analytical, but somebody opening their heart to the Dharma and having it affect them in a very emotional way. It was like a personal diary or a spiritual confession to read it in that way. And then on the right is the book I'm using mainly for today. It's called Great Faith, Great Wisdom. These two authors actually are part of the same Sangha in England. They are studying Pure Land Buddhism. They stumbled upon Shinran kind of independently, and they wrote two wonderful books that are very modern and come with a lot different perspective and viewpoint, which I found fascinating. So I wanted to read a quote by Reverend Dr. Ken Tanaka. He's one of the ministers of our tradition, and when he likes a book, I buy it. So he said, unshackled by the binding orthodoxy often found in East Asian Buddhism, the European authors of Great Faith, Great Wisdom offer perspectives that are refreshingly insightful and novel. By stressing the value of imagination over understanding, the book shows why Pure Land Buddhism has been a dominant stream of Mahayana Buddhism for 2 millennia. Readers will be fascinated by dimensions and sensibilities beyond the usual doctrines and meditations that the West has come to associate with Buddhism. So I thought that was fantastic. I just got goosebumps and I immediately bought the book. And these are some quotes from the book itself, from the author. And these names, Ratnaguna, Sradhapa, these are their Dharma names. They're homeos. So, their name might be Larry Smith and Frank Evertson or something, but these are their names as monastics. And I found this very interesting. This frustrates a lot of people, but it's nice to be told why. Mahayana sutras are often incomplete teachings, even though some of them are very long, hundreds of pages long in some cases. You'd think with all those pages, the author should be able to get the whole of the path in, wouldn't you? After all, in the early Pali Sutras, the Buddha often manages to teach the whole path, ethics, meditations, and wisdom, in just a few paragraphs. The answer to this is that the Mahayana Sutras assume prior knowledge of the early teachings of the Buddha. So Americans like to have Buddhism in a paragraph or a sentence. We really like that in a reel on Instagram. There's a story about Shinran. A scholar said that Shinran never talks about the Eightfold Path or the Four Noble Truths. And the scholar asked, why is that? Well, there could be 3 reasons. The first reason is that Shinran never heard of him. He's a Mahayana Buddhist, and he never heard of the Four Noble Truths. And the scholar said, obviously, that's not true. The next one would be that he never heard of him. He'd never heard of them before. Or that he doesn't agree with them. So those were the first 2. He never heard of them before, or he heard of them, but he just didn't agree. And then the third one is what the scholar chose, is that Shinran assumes that that's well understood. This is a Mahayana characteristic, that it assumes that the reader has a very good knowledge of the details of general Buddhism. And so Mahayana teachings come at us in a grand emotional style to touch our hearts. But when you're starting out and you're trying to learn Buddhism from the very beginning, this can be quite confusing. So the author says, what surprised me was the idea that our happiness and well-being depend on our having someone or something to revere. The inference being that if you don't revere anyone, you'd better find someone you can revere. I suspect that this statement surprised me because of my social conditioning. I've been brought up in a largely rational, scientific era in which religion, and therefore faith, has been and continues to be discredited. So this idea of not appealing to our intellect with doctrine or theology, but to touch our hearts and our emotions with stories that move us, grand myths that are of profound meaning and truth. And this person we look up to is Amida Buddha, the epitome of the Buddha who embraces all just as they are. And one thing we do in our myths and stories is they always start out with once upon a time. This gives it a timeless quality, a grand mythic quality. And this reminds me a lot of the first Star Wars movie. When Star Wars began, it's super high tech, it's super futuristic, and yet it happened a long, long, long time ago. And so this gives it this transcendent, timeless truth where myth and these grand stories live. So I want to share some of these modern examples with you. First, I watched the movie Maestro with Bradley Cooper and Carey Mulligan. He plays Leonard Bernstein, and it was not a good movie, in my opinion. I was very disappointed. But the movie opens with this quotation: "A work of art does not answer questions, it provokes them. And its essential meaning is in the tension between the contradictory answers." So a lot of the Mahayana Sutras, the larger sutra, much of it's contradictory. You have to hold two things in your mind at the same time. Two things can be true. And so it really challenges us. It challenges, it's a story that can't be understood rationally. And so this is why we have the tension within these stories. And in the West, things are either true or false. If they're true, if they're historically true, they have meaning. Otherwise, they're considered false. But most scholars claim that myth is a grander truth, a greater truth, a more provocative type of truth. This is also one of my favorite movies. It might have helped me convert to Buddhism. It's called Little Buddha by Bernardo Bertolucci with Keanu Reeves from The Matrix. Bridget Fonda and Chris Isaak are in it. And in Bernardo Bertolucci's film, Little Buddha, a lama named Norbu asks a student if he has read the story of the Buddha. And the young student says, yes, is the reply. I have read the myths. A myth, says Lama Norbu, is one way of telling the truth. So a myth is a profound way of communicating truth that's a grander truth than historical truth. And then this is one of my favorite scholars. Her name's Rita M. Gross. She's written a lot of articles about the truth about truth and the dangers of literalism. And she read this book here on the left called Black Elk Speaks, a very famous American Indian, I think during the 19th and 20th centuries. And she wrote, one of the wisest statements about history and story that I've ever encountered was spoken by Black Elk, a holy man of the Lakota Nation during the 19th and 20th centuries. In Black Elk Speaks, he narrates one of the Lakota's most important stories, a story about how the sacred pipe first came to the people. This story is filled with events that are difficult to take literally, such as women turning into buffaloes. At the story's conclusion, Black Elk said, "This they tell, and whether it happened so or not, I do not know. But if you think about it, you can see that it's true. So this is the way we appreciate myths. And then Joseph Campbell in the upper left, one of my favorite mythologists, and helped me appreciate the three Pure Land Sutras. He said, and he also helped on the first two Star Wars, every religion is true one way or another. It is true when understood metaphorically, but when it gets stuck in its own metaphors, interpreting them as facts, then you're in real trouble. So it's really important that we don't try to read these stories for doctrine or for facts or for history, but they are transmitting a profound Buddhist message. So we have to read these texts in a different way, not the way we read the Bible, but maybe the way we would read a grand novel, a grand story. So this is a book by James C. Dobbins, and a lot of Buddhist schools start out with a sacred practice, an important practice. But in the Pure Land tradition, there is a sacred story, and it expresses and embodies its core values, goals, and ideals. Neither philosophical principles nor moral truths can be a substitute for it, for they cannot exert the emotive influence that the story does. So it emotes, it affects our heart. We feel the story. We don't necessarily understand it, but we feel it and we sense its meaning. This is another good book. I should get kickbacks from Amazon. Pure Land, History, Tradition, and Practice by Charles B. Jones. He says, a story forms the heart and foundation of Pure Land Buddhism. Elements of the story are scattered across several texts. Nevertheless, the narrative about to unfold is the story for all practitioners of Pure Land Buddhism. So it's a story, not a practice, that touches our hearts. It causes us to see the world through new eyes. It awakens an imagination in us in a different way of living, a different way of existing. And this is a rough outline of the story. Again, once upon a time, many eons ago, a Buddha named Lokesvararaja appeared in the world. An unnamed king heard of this and developed an aspiration to attain enlightenment under his tutelage and for the sake of all beings. Renouncing his kingdom, he became a monk bodhisattva named Dharmakara and joined Lokesvararaja's assembly. And what I find really interesting about this paragraph is that the king is unnamed. I mean, he's a great king. He's got massive military power, economic resources beyond our imagination, and yet he's unnamed in the story. He doesn't even deserve a name until he becomes Dharmakara and begins to follow a teacher. And now he's deserving to be named as a real character in the story. As Dharmakara outlined his religious aims to his master, he laid particular emphasis upon the various qualities of the Buddha land that he intended to establish upon his enlightenment. Dharmakara, finally, 10 eons ago, was able to achieve perfect awakening and became known as the Buddha Amida. The fact that he attained his goals means that his vows came to fruition. So there's 48 vows. He didn't accomplish the 48 vows and become a Buddha. When he became a Buddha, these 48 vows became true. And this is basically saying that all the requirements for our awakening has already been satisfied. It's not a being problem. It's a seeing problem. It's our birthright to realize awakening due to this grand myth. That's what this grand myth is telling us, is that when Amida becomes Buddha, everybody is embraced and everybody's spiritual destination is guaranteed or assured. But we don't believe it. We think we got to earn it and we got to be different and we got to compete. And that's what causes us to not make progress. The tradition that we will be exploring bases itself squarely upon the story that describes how Amida conceived and executed his Buddha land. It understands that the fulfillment of the vows he undertook at the outset of his long and arduous journey to Buddhahood laid open a way for ordinary, non-elite Buddhists to escape samsara and secure their true awakening. And so what we're trying to do here is imagine a different reality, a reality that is embracing us, teaching us, guiding us towards awakening without any effort on our own. We have to get out of our own way. And this story is the foundation of a Buddhist practice in the Pure Land Way. So now I would like to talk a little bit about metaphors, myths, and narratives. They're all related to one another. A metaphor is something's like something else. A myth is a grand story. And a narrative is how we fit the facts of our lives to a story. A narrative is how we think of the events of our lives, our story, how it all fits together. And the facts on the ground don't change, but how you interpret these events in your life can lead to much different narratives. And I would say they're all valid. And what Pure Land Buddhism is asking us to do is choose a narrative of self-discovery, of realization. And from D.T. Suzuki, if we're nothing but intellectual beings, there would be no hope for a spiritual life. So if this is just something you understand and you've read in textbooks, you really need to balance it with feeling and emotion and imagination. So what we're asked, I think, in the Pure Land tradition is, what's my story? What story am I living? What's the narrative that I've created for my life? I can see the world as difficult and hard, or I can see it as a place of awakening or enlightenment, without changing the facts on the ground. So a lot of this is also done through narrative therapy. So you meet a therapist and you relate the events in your life, but it's really important that you get them listed in the right order. In my family, we've had arguments, but people get the order of the responses and statements out of whack. Somebody will say, well, I called you that name after you said this. And it's like, no, you said that first, and then I called you the name. So order is important. And we also, we focus on certain events in our life and maybe ignore others. And so what Buddhism is trying to do is give us a new narrative in which to live our lives, to see through a different lens. The meaning of the events in your life are whatever is important, the value, the meaning. We tend to stop judging things as good or bad, and we tend to focus on the meaning and the value. And so your narrative can become quite positive if some of the worst things in your life could end up being some of the most important things that led you on a spiritual journey. And so it's complicated. And you begin to have gratitude for everything in your life that opened up the way for you. So a lot of times they'll have you document the evidence. It helps a lot to write things down, to physically see it and physically engage in it. So a narrative therapist believe new stories take hold when there's an audience to appreciate and support them. And so writing these things down naturally linearizes the story of your life, and it forces you to get things in the right order. And when you do that, a lot of times you have real insight and can see things much more clear. And we do this by self-reflection. So narrative therapy is a method of therapy that separates a person from their problem. It encourages people to rely on their own skills to minimize problems that exist in their lives. Throughout life, personal experiences become personal stories. People give these stories meaning, and the stories help shape a person's identity. Narrative therapy uses the power of these stories to help people discover their life purpose. This is often done by assigning that person the role of narrator in their own story. So, this is done in Buddhism by self-reflection, having gratitude, listening intimately to others, opening up to different points of view and viewpoints, realizing we don't have all the answers. This is a powerful way for you to create a new life story, one that it's freeing and opening, and a new pathway for one to grow and excel in life. So I wanted to share this with you. There's a scholar named Donald Lopez, and there's another scholar named Luis O. Gomez. And sometimes I have to admit, I get Gomez and Lopez mixed up. Donald Lopez is alive and well. I think he's a great scholar, a lot of good books. Gomez is amazing. He's actually, he taught at the College of Mexico. And he wrote this essay I found on the internet called On Reading Literature Literally, Concrete Imagery Before Doctrine. And this kind of shocked me. He's saying that you should read the Pure Land Sutras literally, not metaphorically, not mythically, but read them literally. And then the other thing I did is when I read the larger sutra, I would take elements of the story and map it back to doctrine. So, this part of the story has to do with impermanence. And this part of the story has to do with the Eightfold Path. And this part of the story is dealing with karma. So all the elements of the myth were merely placeholders for doctrine. And he's saying, don't do that. Let the imagery grow. Let it be concrete. So this was shocking. This is the hardest essay I've ever read. I read it once and highlighted it, and then I had to go back and read just my highlights. But it's an amazing, and it's on Everyday Buddhist in one of our courses. So he said, what would have made the existence of Amida Buddha believable to an audience in ancient India? I mean, this was a really popular story. What would that belief look like if it were understood literally and not simply as a metaphor for some philosophical or ethical conception? I have here argued that we must add to these evidently vital and valid forms of reading the sutras a dimension that, for lack of a better word, that he calls narrative vistas. Worlds can be constructed narratively in such a way that the believer begins to have a clear view, a vista, and perhaps even a vision that, despite its apparent unnaturalness, constitutes a reality that becomes natural by virtue of narrative power, because it is in our own nature to live in narrative realities, and religion is not an exception to that rule. So what he's saying is that when you read the Pure Land Sutras and you read about the descriptions of people and places and things, he's saying that's literally the way the world would look to somebody that's realized insight or awakening. This is literally the narrative that they have created and in which they live. The birds are chirping the Dharma. When the wind blows, you feel the flow of life. When the sun shines, you feel the warmth of wisdom. That this is literally the narrative in which you can place yourself if you have an awakening, and you create a narrative that embraces true reality, manifesting form all around us. That everything that happens is our teacher, and we're embedded in this support system that's pulling us and leading us to greater levels of insight and realization. So at Senshin, they had all those statues. They also have an art gallery upstairs. wonderful, wonderful statues. They would all go into Buddhas Everywhere, Part 1. But I found this sign on the wall here on the left. That's the original image. This is the image that I typed in. I often think that traditional Jodo Shinshu people still think of Amida as a person, but I think that's a me problem, right? I keep thinking it as something concrete and literal. I wanted to read this paragraph to you. This is from a traditional Jodo Shinshu temple. It's about Amida. Up there on the upper right is Namo Amida Butsu. So Amida is a combination of the term Tathagata Amida and Amitayus in Sanskrit. The reality of the cosmos represented in the form of a Buddha known as Amitabha and Amitayus, meaning immeasurable light and immeasurable life. The Japanese pronunciation of the Sanskrit is Amida. The term Tathagata or Nyorai means come from thusness, or to come from suchness, or to come from true formless reality. That is, coming from the indescribable, inconceivable reality called thusness. When this thusness takes form, it is called a cosmic or primordial Buddha, as opposed to the historical person called the Buddha. Amida Buddha is the most widespread and widely known of the Mahayana cosmic or transcendent Buddhas. They are not separate existences, but are manifestations of the Dharma itself. Namo Amida Butsu means I take refuge in the Buddha Amida, the manifestation of the Absolute. So this is saying that transcendent reality is becoming immanent in our everyday lives all the time, whether we're aware of it or not. And that is what the grand story of the Pure Land Sutras are about, that this is something we can come in contact with without going anywhere. It's all around us. We just have to have eyes to see and ears to hear. And this is my last quote. Roijin Soga is also a very famous Japanese scholar. I thought this was great. He said, "We do not believe in Buddha or God because they actually exist. They exist because we believe in them." So, you have to think about that quote for a long while. But they exist when we take it to heart, when we embody the teachings of the larger sutra, when we begin to take it as a literal narrative rather than a myth or merely metaphoric for a doctrinal point or theological treaty. That these stories are meant to move us. They're very repetitive to be chanted, and they're very grand in nature. A lot of people read these texts and they feel like they didn't really learn anything, but you feel something, and it changes the way you engage the world around you, and your life begins to take on new meaning. And this is why these statues and these texts and these stories were wildly popular 2,000 years ago. And as Western readers, we have to change the way we read these texts. When we read novels, we don't worry about whether they're literally true or not. The story's fantastic. Star Wars is amazing. But when it comes to religious texts, we read Buddhist sutras the way we read the Bible, that it has to be true in the sense that it historically occurred, rather than a transcendent story or myth that moves us in ways that we can't articulate, but we're different from the experience. And so if we can open ourselves up and let Buddhism affect us bodily, rather than just in terms of orientations on factual teachings, that's when we begin to change and we begin to open up to new ways of recognizing and engaging with reality itself. So we're at 2:40. I hit the nail on the head. I'm very happy. I'm going to show you one more thing before we open up for discussion. We're having another live event Next event will be June 19th, 2026, again at 2 p.m. I'm assuming this is a Thursday or a Friday. Somebody could correct me. A contemporary interpretation of Amida Buddha and the Nembutsu with Dr. Kenji Akahoshi Sensei. He also did a live event for us within the Buddhist course pathway. We've had him speak. He's excellent, and I hope you're able to attend that as well.